The ticking of the wall clock marked the start of another quiet Saturday in Anna's home. The smell of fresh coffee blended with the sound of soft worship songs coming from the small kitchen radio. It was an ordinary morning, but Anna always treated each day as a gift, and this one was no different. As she stirred the spoon in her mug, she smiled at the sound of hurried footsteps coming down the stairs. "Mom, have you seen my blue shirt? The one from the youth camp?" Anna pointed to the chair in the living room, chuckling softly. Samuel was tall and slender, with slightly wavy hair that was always messy. He had lively eyes and an easy smile, the kind that lit up even the darkest corners of a room. "Are you leaving early today?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm going to Andre's house. We're rehearsing the songs for Tuesday's cell group. I might stop by the church later." Anna nodded. It wasn't a surprise. Samuel was involved in everything. Youth, ministry, worship, nursing home visits. His faith wasn't just spoken, it was lived. And Anna knew he had inherited that from his father. It had been 8 years since Anna's husband passed away after a short battle with cancer. She was left holding a young Samuel in her arms and a faith that seemed impossible to sustain. But she held on. She raised her son with a heart rooted in the Word, even when everything around her seemed to crumble. The absence of her husband hurt, but Samuel's presence filled the empty spaces with love and purpose. That day, after he left on his bike, Anna spent the hours organizing things around the house. She set aside clothes to donate, read a chapter from her devotional, prepared lunch, and even took a light nap on the couch. It was the ring of the landline that broke the afternoon silence. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was tense, almost unrecognizable. "Mrs. Anna, this is Pastor Marcos. Could you please come to the city hospital?" Anna's heart stopped for a second. Her voice came out in a whisper. "Is it Samuel?" There was a cruel silence before the answer. "Please come, and bring someone with you if you can." The rest of the words faded into the air. Anna couldn't think. She grabbed her purse, the car keys, and ran out the door. She barely felt the ground beneath her feet. She didn't even hear the neighbor asking if everything was okay. At the hospital, the hallways felt longer than they should have. When she saw the pastor, a knot formed in her stomach. His eyes were filled with tears, and he was holding a crumpled piece of paper. Behind him, a nurse watched with a look of deep compassion. "Is he?" Anna's voice cracked. "Is he okay?" The pastor hesitated, then simply shook his head. That was all it took. Anna collapsed to her knees on the cold hospital floor. She didn't cry, she screamed. A scream that tore not just her throat, but her soul. A scream that said everything words could never express. "No, not my son, God, no!" Her hands clutched. Her chest, as if trying to hold together a heart about to shatter into 1,000 pieces. People rushed over, tried to help, but Anna didn't see them. Everything turned into a blur. The world had lost its color, its sound, its reason. Inside the room, Samuel lay still, his face peaceful as if he were sleeping. The doctor explained it was instantaneous. A speeding truck couldn't brake in time. He didn't suffer. Anna didn't hear a word of the explanation. She walked up to her son's body, ran her fingers through his messy hair and whispered, "Why didn't you tell me, my love? Why did you leave so soon?" Then, turning to the sky, somewhere between a plea and an accusation, "Why, Lord, why?" She stayed there, unmoving, until the hospital lights began to dim. The city slept, but Anna knew this would be the first of many sleepless nights. The day had started like any other, but it ended with an absence that would never be filled. It was as if the sun had stopped shining. Silence had become a constant presence in the house. Since the funeral, Anna walked around like a shadow of herself. The days passed slowly, as if time dragged on out of respect for her pain. Everything was just as Samuel had left it. The pair of sneakers beside the bed, The Bible opened to Psalm 91 on the nightstand, and the backpack hanging on the chair with the worship notebook still visible through the zipper. She entered that room every day, but couldn't bring herself to move anything. It was as if preserving the space could somehow keep part of him alive. The scent, the objects, the details, everything was a bridge between longing and memory. The sun still came through the window, but it no longer lit the room the same way. Anna spent long hours sitting at the edge of the bed, staring blankly into space. She no longer cried like in the early days. It was a heavier sorrow, paralyzing. A pain so deep, it silenced even the tears. The neighbors tried to help. The pastor called frequently. Church members knocked on her door with words of comfort and psalms ready on their lips. But Anna turned them all away. The faith that had once sustained her life now seemed distant, almost ironic. She kept asking how God could allow such injustice to happen to someone who only loved, served, and believed in him. "If you are good," she whispered one morning, "why did you take my son?" That was the question that echoed day and night. Anna read the promises in Scripture with empty eyes. She knew the verses by heart, but none of them seemed to carry any real weight now. The words felt hollow, disconnected from her reality. All things work together for good. She would slam the Bible shut before she could finish reading. She began avoiding church. She couldn't bear the hymns, the comforting hugs, the repeated "we're praying for you" phrases spoken like mantras. Even worse were the attempts at explanation. God knows what he's doing. Samuel is in a better place now. God was sparing him from something worse. Sparing him from what? He was only 17. He had dreams, plans. He was pure, generous, light itself. What was the point of it all? Anna felt ashamed for doubting, but the pain shouted louder than doctrine. She started to wonder if all the effort, all the prayer, all the fasting had meant anything at all. After all, God hadn't protected her greatest treasure. How could she trust him again? The nights were the worst. The pillow next to her bed remained untouched, the same one Samuel used when, as a child, he'd run to sleep beside her after a nightmare. Now she was the one living a nightmare, and there was no one to comfort her. One early morning, after tossing and turning for hours, Anna got up and went into her son's room. She sat at his desk and looked at the notebook where he used to jot down his compositions. She ran her fingers over the cover as if touching a sacred relic. She opened it slowly. The first pages were full of worship notes, sermon outlines, thoughts about faith and hope. Tucked between the pages was a loose, folded sheet of paper with a prayer written on it. "Lord, even if tomorrow never comes, help me to trust that your will is always good. Teach me to believe even when my eyes don't see. May my life reflect your glory, even on cloudy days. Amen." Anna held the paper in trembling hands. For a moment she felt something strange, not relief, not comfort, but an even deeper emptiness. It was as if God had heard that prayer and answered it. She let the paper fall into her lap and hugged, her knees resting her forehead on them like she used to do as a child. Tears began to fall again, silent tears, not just for the pain, but for the disorientation. There, in that room filled with memories, Anna no longer knew who she was, and she no longer knew who God was either. The days had started to blur together in Anna's mind. She no longer knew whether it was Tuesday or Saturday, whether she'd had coffee or just dragged herself to the couch. Time had lost its rhythm, as if the world kept moving forward while she remained frozen at the same point, the moment she heard the pastor's voice on the phone. One morning, the sky was covered with thick clouds, and a light drizzle fell slowly, as if it too were in mourning. Still in her nightgown, Anna decided to do something different, clean Samuel's room. Not out of desire, but from an impulse she couldn't explain. She began by folding a few clothes, then picked up scattered books and stacked them carefully on the shelf. When she opened the desk drawer, she found various papers, old notes, song drafts, scribbled verses. At the back of the drawer, a sealed white envelope caught her attention. In firm, familiar handwriting it read, "To my mom. Read this when you feel like everything is lost." Her heart raced. For a moment she hesitated. Her hands trembled as she touched the paper. She sat on the edge of the bed and with careful hands broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet, handwritten. The first lines brought tears to her eyes. "Mom, if you're reading this, something really hard may have happened. I wrote this letter not knowing when it would be read, but I write with one certainty. God doesn't make mistakes. Never. I know it'll be hard to believe that right now. Maybe you're angry with him. Maybe you're wondering where he was. But I want you to know, he was with me. He's with you. He's there now. A few days ago, I had a dream. I dreamed I was walking through a field full of flowers. Everything was so bright. Jesus was waiting for me in the distance, smiling. He reached out his hand and said, "Soon you will understand. Your mother will need comfort, and you'll be part of that. But don't be afraid. The promise will be born in the valley. Mom, if I'm no longer there when you read this, trust. Trust, even without understanding. God didn't take me. He planted me, and something new will bloom." Anna couldn't hold back the tears. She pressed the paper to her chest as if trying to fuse it with her heart. The letter, written with so much peace and love, disarmed her defenses. Samuel felt present there, not in body, but in spirit, in truth, in purpose. She read the final line over and over. God didn't take me, he planted me, and something new will bloom. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since the tragedy, she prayed. Her voice came out weak, hoarse, but genuine. "God, I don't understand, but I'm here. I'm still yours." The words came between sobs, but they were honest. It was the first act of faith, though hesitant, since the loss. A tiny seed of hope had been planted by Samuel's hands through the words of a son who saw beyond time. In the days that followed, Anna began carrying that letter with her. She read it aloud whenever silence threatened to overwhelm her. She started writing down thoughts, prayers, verses that once felt empty, but were now beginning to find a place in her heart again. One night, lying in bed with the letter beside her, she felt longing, not the kind that traps, but the kind that transforms. She thought of Samuel's dream, the field of flowers, the promise born in the valley. For the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, the deep pain could become a testimony. And so, in the still wounded heart of a grieving mother, a seed began to grow. It wasn't joy, nor complete relief. It was faith, fragile but real, and it was the beginning of something new. Samuel's letter became a silent compass for Anna. She read it every day as one waters a fragile plant, hoping something will sprout from the dry soil of her heart. Little by little, the faith that had once seemed dead began to show small signs of life, discreet but genuine. One cold Sunday morning, Anna sat at the table with a cup of tea in her hands. She gazed out the window at the yard, wet from the previous night's rain. The plants Samuel had helped care for, the same ones she had let wither over the past months, now caught her attention. She got up and went over to them. Kneeling in the still, damp earth, she began to remove dry leaves, broken branches, and clean the pots. Her hands, dirty with soil, brought a strange sense of peace. It was as if, by caring for the life around her, Anna was also allowing God to care for the life inside her. That week, she returned to church for the first time since the funeral. She sat in the back pews, discreetly. Many noticed her, but they respected her silence. When the worship began, Anna didn't sing. She simply listened. But, deep within, something stirred. One of the songs spoke about new beginnings, about God's faithfulness even in the darkest seasons. And as everyone sang, she closed her eyes and murmured, "I'm still here, Lord." After the service, the pastor approached cautiously. He didn't say much. He simply hugged her, and Anna cried, not out of anger but of relief. It was the first time she felt she could cry in God's arms without fear, without explanations, without needing to understand everything. Over time, she began attending the prayer meetings again. She started writing down small verses on cards, leaving them scattered around the house. She returned to cooking, to listening to worship music, to taking care of herself. It was a slow process, full of ups and downs, but it was movement, and that was already a lot. One afternoon, while organizing Samuel's closet, she found a notebook she hadn't seen before. Inside, along with song drafts, was a plan. Samuel wanted to create a ministry with the youth of the community. The title on the cover was Promise in the Valley Project. Anna smiled through her tears. Those words now made more sense than ever. It wasn't just a nice name, it was the very prophecy of her journey. The promise will be born from the valley. Samuel's words echoed once more. She felt that it was more than a memory. It was a calling. God was asking her to continue what her son had dreamed. That same week, Anna spoke to the pastor. She told him about the project, about Samuel's notebooks, about the letter. The pastor listened attentively, and with tears in his eyes, he said, "Maybe his mission isn't over. Maybe it continues through you." These words ignited something within Anna. For the first time since the tragedy, she felt alive, not just breathing, but living with purpose. She decided to gather some youth from the church and present the idea of the promise in the valley. She shared Samuel's writings, his vision, his dreams. The response was immediate. Many were moved. Some who had drifted away began to get involved again. Others, who had never led anything, felt encouraged to serve. And so, in just a few months, the project became a reality. Meetings started taking place in Anna's garage. Worship, Bible studies, moments of sharing and prayer filled the house once again. It was as if every corner of the home, once silent, began to breathe life again. Anna began to smile more often. There was still longing, still difficult days. But there were also fruits of a pain that had been sown with faith. On the living room wall, she hung a painting with Samuel's words, "God didn't take me, He planted me, and something new will bloom." And it bloomed. The Promise in the Valley project quickly became more than Anna had imagined. Young people from neighboring neighborhoods began to hear about the meetings in the garage. Some came out of curiosity, others in search of something they couldn't quite name. And all of them in some way found acceptance, truth, and hope. Anna, despite having no formal leadership experience, became a spiritual mother of sorts to many. The pain she carried, far from pushing people away, drew them in. It wasn't the kind of pain that isolates. It was the kind that connects, that transforms wounds into bridges. And that made her someone the young people trusted. She didn't speak much about herself, but every now and then, between a song and a prayer, she mentioned Samuel. She would show his notebook with his plans, read excerpts from the letter she had found, and share the phrase that had now become her life motto. God didn't take, He planted. One evening, during one of the meetings, a young woman named Rebecca asked to share a testimony. With a hesitant voice, she explained that she had considered giving up on life months earlier. She said she felt invisible, purposeless, as if the world could go on without noticing her absence. But then someone sent me a video about the project, and I saw your story, your son's story. And I thought, if you managed to keep going after losing the most precious thing you had, maybe I can too. Maybe God has also planted something in me, even if it only feels like pain right now. Anna stepped down from the small platform where she usually stood during the meetings and hugged Rebecca in front of everyone. No words were spoken, just shared tears. And in that moment, Anna understood more deeply what it meant when pain becomes seed. It wasn't just about what she had lost, it was about what was being born in herself and in others. The following week, she received an invitation from the pastor to share her testimony at church. She hesitated. It was still hard to speak in public about Samuel without her voice faltering. But when she prayed, she felt something different, a lightness, as if heaven were encouraging her. On Sunday, before a packed church, Anna stepped up to the pulpit with her heart racing. She carried with her Samuel's letter, the notebook with the project, and a freshly picked flower from the garden she now tended with love. Flowers Samuel had helped plant. "I'm not here today because I'm strong," she began. "I'm here because I was sustained by a God who doesn't give up, even when we think everything is over." She spoke of the pain, the anger, the silence. She also spoke of the letter, the calling, the transformation, and she ended with a sentence that left the church in complete silence. Sometimes God doesn't answer as we expect. Sometimes He answers by planting in us the answer the world needs. And that answer, my brothers, is faith that continues even without understanding. The following week, she received an invitation from the pastor to share her testimony at church. She hesitated. It was still hard to speak in public about Samuel without her voice faltering. But when she prayed, she felt something different, a lightness, as if heaven were encouraging her. On Sunday, before a packed church, Anna stepped up to the pulpit with her heart racing. She carried with her Samuel's letter, the notebook with the project, and a freshly picked flower from the garden she now tended with love. Flowers Samuel had helped plant. "I'm not here today because I'm strong," she began. "I'm here because I was sustained by a God who doesn't give up, even when we think everything is over." She spoke of the pain, the anger, the silence. She also spoke of the letter, the calling, the transformation, and she ended with a sentence that left the church in complete silence. Sometimes God doesn't answer as we expect. Sometimes He answers by planting in us the answer the world needs. And that answer, my brothers, is faith that continues even without understanding. Time passed with the gentleness of healed days. What had once been a desert in Anna had become a fertile field, where God's presence bloomed in every detail, in the smile of a transformed young person, in the collective prayers that filled her garage, in the notes she received with phrases like, "Thank you for making me believe again." Promise in the Valley had surpassed the neighborhood's boundaries. Neighboring churches began replicating the idea, and Anna was invited to meetings, seminars, and vigils. She, who had felt empty and broken for so long, was now a channel of encouragement and faith. But she knew that all of this was the result of something she could never forget, the seed planted in the valley of pain. One afternoon, while organizing a new meeting with leaders from other groups, Anna sat down at the table with Samuel's old notebook. The project, which once occupied a few scribbled pages, was now gaining structure, purpose, and reach. She flipped through the notes as if listening to a conversation from the past. On the last page, something new caught her attention. There was an incomplete draft of a worship song titled "The Promise in the Valley." The lyrics were brief but deeply moving. Even in the valley, He plants flowers. Even in the pain, He makes life. Even without seeing, I will trust, because the promise is born in the breaking. Anna read and reread those lines until the tears gently flowed down her face. It was as if Samuel had known that one day this song would be found, as if he already saw, even before he left, that his life would leave roots that no one could pull out. Inspired, Anna shared the lyrics with one of the young musicians in the project. In a few days, a simple but profoundly touching melody was born. The song began to close the meetings, becoming an anthem not only of remembrance, but of hope for all. On the first anniversary of Samuel's passing, Anna decided to do something special. She organized an outdoor service on the very land where he had dreamed of building a small center for the youth. There were chairs, a small tent, modest lights, but everything was prepared with love. The evening was serene, and the clear sky revealed stars that seemed closer than ever. Many attended, friends, family, young people, pastors. And there, in front of everyone, Anna shared Samuel's letter again, but this time not with a choked voice, but with a chest full of faith. What seemed like the end was only the beginning. What seemed like loss was seed. Today, we see fruits. Today, we see flowers, and all of this, she said, pointing to the moved faces, was born from the valley. At the end of the service, they sang Samuel's song together, and there, under the starry sky, Ina felt as though eternity was near, as if heaven and earth were touching, as if the promise had finally fully blossomed. That night, before going to bed, Ina wrote in her journal, "The pain hasn't disappeared. The longing still lives within me. But now I know God never stopped being in control. He didn't prevent the valley, but He made the promise rise within it. And I am living proof of that." She closed the journal with gratitude, and, in silence, she thanked, "Thank you, Lord, because even when everything seemed lost, you were planting a greater purpose." The year that followed brought great changes for Anna, and for all those who were part of Promise in the Valley. The project expanded so much that Anna had to delegate responsibilities. Many young people became leaders, and meetings started to take place in different locations, even in distant communities. However, she never stopped being at the forefront of what God had started in her heart. Samuel's Center for the Youth, which had once seemed like a distant dream, began to be built little by little. The foundation was laid with the help of the community, who came together to honor the memory of a son who, even though no longer physically present, had left an immeasurable legacy. One autumn afternoon, Anna walked through the flower beds of the new center. The place was growing. A small building was starting to take shape. Around her, the trees she had helped plant were already blooming. The soft fragrance of the flowers made her stop for a moment and look up at the sky. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, Lord," she said, as if speaking to a friend. "But I know that what you've planted here will never fade, because you are faithful, even when everything around us tells us otherwise." Suddenly, someone touched her on the shoulder. It was Rebecca, the young woman who had found the courage to live again years ago. She held a flower in her hands, one of the flowers that bloomed in Samuel's garden, and handed it to Anna. "This is for you. I was thinking about everything you've taught us, and now the flower reminds me of this. God's promise never fades. Even in the valley, He makes it bloom." Anna looked at the flower with teary eyes, but with a serene smile on her face. She knew that the flower was not just a plant. It was a testimony of a transformed life, a symbol of faith that had been planted and cultivated, now bearing fruit in everyone around her. The days passed, and the center slowly became a beacon of light. More young people began to attend the meetings, not only from the city, but from increasingly distant places. Samuel's legacy was now being lived out in every heart that embraced God's promise. Anna, who had once carried the pain of profound mourning, now carried the joy of seeing God's hand moving powerfully. She knew that the pain of losing Samuel would never completely disappear, but the greater purpose had been revealed, and that sustained her. One afternoon, as she looked out at the horizon, Anna wrote one more phrase in her journal with the same pen she had used to write the first words of her journey. "When pain finds us, it does not come to destroy, but to teach. When we give our tears to the Lord, He turns them into seeds, and so in the place where despair tried to bloom, God planted His promise, a promise that never fades." She took a deep breath and looked again at the flowers around her. Those flowers were proof That even in the darkest valleys, God always has a purpose. They were there, strong, colorful, and alive, flowers that would never fade. Now, what Anna most desired was to share this truth with as many people as possible. The journey that had begun at the depths of her valley of pain was now helping others find the light. And she knew that God's purpose continued to be fulfilled, not only in the building of the center, but in every soul touched by the story of faith and new beginnings. If you who have read this far feel like you are in your own valley, remember God's promise never fails. You may not understand now, the path may seem uncertain, but just like Anna, you can choose to believe that the pain you feel today is the seed of what God will do tomorrow. Don't give up, because in the valley, flowers can still bloom. What will you choose to sow today?